everyone, and welcome to Cancer Book Club for November of 2018. Pleased today to have with us Mark Arsenault, who is a member of my own community in colorectal cancer, and we're talking today about his book, Semicolon, amusing title about a not-so-amusing topic. And so welcome, Mark, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Great to finally see you face to face.
Yes, that's right. That's right. You get it's always you see these people that we've known, we've interacted for years with our avatars on Facebook, and now now we're all real people. So Mark, so you wrote that book some time ago. What year did you publish it?
I actually published it in, oh gosh, I'm having to think. I want to say 2014.
2014, yeah, same as me. And yeah, right. So
about 5 years after my diagnosis.
How long had you been out of How long had you been out of treatment at the time you wrote it?
I was just about. I published it almost to the day 5 years after I was diagnosed, and I had been out of treatment for about 3.5 years, 4 years.
So that's a significant landmark. Then it was a significant landmark to have it on 5 days, 5 years remission day or whatever. I don't know when, we never know as survivors what data to date survivorship from. Is it from the day you have your surgery, the day you're diagnosed, the day you end chemo, whatever it is? So
I even struggled with the definition. At what point do you consider yourself a survivor? I remember even in some of the communities and the support groups I was in, I always felt like I didn't belong in that category, until finally at one point somebody at CRE had said, or CRC had said, you're a survivor from the moment that you're diagnosed, because that's your goal.
I think that's kind of a cop-out on the definition, and I agree with you. I don't know how to define that, because I supposedly have an incurable cancer, and I resist the idea of being called a survivor. It pisses me off, quite honestly.
I have the same thing. I was a survivor when I admitted to 5 years, but when I recurred after 8 years, it was like, darn, I hate that word now.
I just like a lot of these terms that we have, and a survivor is one of them. I don't know where to place it.
I think my personal favorite as far as terms is warrior, because as a warrior, you're always ready, you're always prepared for that fight, and just having the mindset of doing it. And that was my particular, my term of choice when I was going through it, and even now.
Were you in the military? If I recall correctly, you'd been, so that, sometimes it's easier to adopt the military metaphor when you.
Well, that's true. But, just being able to go through whatever it, required me to go through. That was another one of my mantras going through treatment. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but one of my mantras was, whatever it takes.
Yes, I remember that you were saying in your book. So I have some questions for you here now. So your book really unfolds in a series of the blog posts that you wrote at the time, and you were the audience for your posts were I'm taking family and friends and folks like that, and so I guess when the thing about writing it like that is that that's what happened in real time, and then you get to when you're writing it, you're in retrospective looking back on those posts where at the time you're writing it, you know things you didn't know at the time you wrote the post. And so my question is, what advice would you give to your newly diagnosed self today, now that you're this far along?
Wow. To be honest, some of the things that I went through, I didn't anticipate. I didn't expect to go through, but, as things came up, like I had mentioned before, my thing was, well, whatever it takes, I'm going to get through this. Looking back, I think there are some parts of that journey I may not have even mentioned to myself, because knowing about them in advance just kind of skews your perspective and your mindset. And my mindset at the time was, I'm overcoming whatever happens. It doesn't matter. But some of it was a little scary, and I was glad, looking back, I'm glad that they came up sort of spontaneously rather than having to anticipate them, because that's, it can be difficult to gird yourself against something bad that is coming. you know.
So your advice would be to kind of take it a day at a time? Is that kind of the?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. Take it a day at a time and understand that there are going to be victories and there's going to be setbacks, large and small on both sides. But as long as you know, you have in your mind that the outcome is going to be a positive one, that whatever happens is what's meant to happen. That's your journey. Your journey is going to unfold the way it's going to unfold. If we had a choice in the matter, I think as cancer warriors or patients or what have you, we would choose not to have cancer in most cases. I think that's fair to say. But there's things that we can't control, and that's the same with all aspects of our life. There's things that happen that we can't control. But as long as we have the mindset that it's not what happens to you that's as important as how you handle it and how you move forward. I think that's the advice I would give.
I think those are very wise words. And I think they're wise words, as you were saying, just for living. Just be here now, do the very best you can, be present, because you don't control the future. And there's no point of creating a wonderful or horrible future, neither of which will ever come to be.
Right.
And so your that perspective on how to move through cancer is would be, you would give the same advice about it when we talk about treatment, when you talk about survivorship. It's sort of just take it as it comes and just
yeah. I think so. There are a lot of things that I learned when I was going through the process, because at that time I was also doing a lot of personal development, and in a way I think my journey was a way of reaffirming the things I was learning and sort of putting it to the test.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know how many of your viewers are spiritual people, but for me, I'm a Christian, and my faith plays a lot into it. I have what I consider universal truths. If there are things that a doctor says, physical or physician says, and a psychiatrist says, and the Bible says, and you know, that's mentioned in the book, The Secret. And if they all align, you know, that to me says, well, there really probably is something to this if it can be explained on from so many different perspectives. And these were things that I was learning as I was going through. So
yeah, I would agree with you. I know I found a lot of solace in a lot of the Buddhist sayings. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And I'm not Buddhist. I'm you know, kind of spiritually independent, if you will. But I think that there are truths to be found in every religion. And when they do align, they're just transcendent. They're so powerful.
Absolutely.
You know, so going back, this is to another question then. You know, when you're writing a book, as I've done and others have done, that you know, it's kind of you have to kind of take a bit of a bird's eye view on what was really right up in front of your face at the time, and then you have to kind of distance yourself enough from it to actually do you know, collected composition. Now you're doing it in form of blog posts kind of helps with that, because because the presentness of that is conveyed in the blog post.
Right. But
my question is, for you, what for you was the most difficult part of your cancer experience, and then the corollary of that, what it was the most uplifting part of your experience?
Well, let me touch on the writing part real quick before I get to that question. When I wrote the book, it was actually not a book. As you mentioned, it was a blog. It was for my friends and family, because after a very short time, I realized there were a lot of people interested in, well, what's the latest news? How are you doing? And I was so entrenched in the fight, if you will, so entrenched in getting through and making progress on this journey, that I found talking about what happened even the week before or at the last doctor's visit got very old. And I found myself kind of getting mentally stuck in those time periods, and I was struggling to move forward. So I found blogging was a great way to get out my thoughts and my feelings and impressions at the time or immediately following events, and then people who were sincerely interested in learning what was going on, and there were quite a few, they could read the blog posts and get much more information than I was at all interested in telling for the 100th time.
Exactly.
You know, so, and when I published the book, I essentially collected all the blog posts with very little editing. I wanted it to be I wanted it to read very much as though you were one of those people following along.
Mhm.
And, you know, where there are large gaps between entries, I usually explained it in the next one, but that's, you know, that's where I was in my journey. And that's the people that were following were reading it as it was happening. As far as what I found to be the most challenging part of the journey, wow. Besides the obvious, you know, the thoughts of mortality, you know, could I die? That was a toughie when you're staring face to face with the prospect of your life ending sooner than you anticipate. And doing a lot of thought about that, I realized, well, I don't really think there's any time that I could come face to face with that and not feel like, well, wait, it's too soon. You know, I could be 80, I could be tomorrow. I'm always going to want more. And so that challenge, that difficult period actually got me thinking more about the quality of the time I was spending today. Every single day that you spend doing anything is a day that's spent. You can't get it back. So whether I died in a week or a year or 10 years or another 50 years, what was I doing day to day? How was I spending that gift that was given to me? Was I spending it in pursuit of something noble? Was I spending quality time with my family and improving relationships? Or was I sitting on the game console playing games and just essentially not investing the time, but just using it? So that was tough, the mortality issue. And then I think some of the discomfort that I experienced with the procedures, that was one of the tough things. That was one of the things that I, given the opportunity, probably would not mention to myself, my now self to my then self. There was one experience in particular that comes to mind, and I think I mentioned it in the book. I was going through an ultrasound. And this was the type of ultrasound where they used a wand, and it was rectal cancer. So the
Right.
ultrasound is accomplished there, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. I haven't felt that much discomfort with one exception. And the doctor even said to me, he leaned over at one point and he said, "I'm sorry, I know this is uncomfortable." I have never had a doctor apologize
Yeah.
for the pain. And then the first thing that I said to him without even thinking was, "It's okay, it's necessary." And he was kind of taken back, but we got through it. So those were the two, I think, toughest things that I experienced. But overall, I think the hardest thing was seeing the toll, the effect that this whole process was having on my family, especially my little girl.
Because she was just very little at the time, right? About 2.
She was, she was very young. And at the time, there was an H1N1 virus outbreak, and the hospital had a policy that minors, children, were not allowed to come into the hospital, period, unless they were patients, period. So all of my post-surgery time, any time that I spent in the hospital, my daughter wasn't allowed in. And so that was really hard for her, when my wife would come in and visit me on occasion and my daughter had to stay with the babysitter. She never got to see her dad, And there were even some pretty inconsiderate, heartless things that folks would say to her. One of the teachers at her daycare that we moved her out of afterward, but said to her that, basically told her that your dad has cancer. Oh, well, he's going to die. People with cancer die. And she freaked out. And I thought, how do you say that to a child?
Yeah.
And it just, it was her ignorance. But that was really difficult, was the effect that I saw it had on my family. But, I thank God for him, because my wife was an amazing advocate.
Yeah, so it's sort of like you're saying, a sort of a flip of the coin, in the sense that, the worst thing, possibly dying, and the best thing, which is appreciating, the maximizing one's quality of life and being mindful of that, is the same it's the same edge of the sword, as it were,
Right.
you know, that goes, cuts both ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I think that one thing that I would hope for anybody would come out of cancer is that appreciation, that deep appreciation of daily life. But I spoke to somebody in the last week or two, and all they had was anger. And maybe, I'm sure there was more there, you know, but I felt really badly for them, because I would hope that through this experience they would find something very positive or very spiritual or very very present, perhaps, to enjoy and to
I
participate.
agree. One of my mentors once said that, you know, the way people react to tragedies or react to big negative events in their life is generally a reflection of their mindset and their personality. Angry people react with anger. People who are fearful, they react with fear. People who, you know, carry a lot of guilt, they feel guilty about things. People who are advocates and helpers, you know, they want to jump in and do something to help. So there's a lot of times I think the adversity really reveals or amplifies, you know, those traits that we have. And until you're able to start thinking about things differently, you tend to be stuck, you know. That's just a
I actually would throw in a different view in this discussion. You know, I'm a psychologist in my day job, and in my thoughts about cancer responses is that you just have to meet people where they're at. If they're angry, they are, and they won't stay angry forever, but people go into wallowing and out of wallowing. People go into anger and out of anger. People go into spirituality and then into superficial, what's on TV type thinking. So people go all over the place, and our job as listeners is to just listen to them where they are at.
Sure. Yeah, that's the same thing that I found with the class.
There's a certain tyranny to, you must be positive at all times. And
no, there's a time to be absolutely distraught. There's no question about it.
Right.
And
absolutely.
you know,
No, I agree with you, Robin. That's one of the things that I found with the classes I was teaching when I used to work in the jail, is that you have to meet people where they're at, whether you're dealing with kids or inmates. You know, if people won't hear certain messages, you know, what will they hear?
Yeah, so this message, the seed is planted, but they might not hear it at that time.
Right, absolutely.
So another, you know, one of the things that's sort of a constant theme in a lot of our interviews that we're doing is that people learn about the importance of being an advocate for their own care. Is that something that you had to wrestle with as you went through your experience?
Oh, absolutely. I remember just at the very beginning, after I was diagnosed, they were talking about starting my treatments in 2 or 3 months. Well, my wife, fortunately, her job was working for the county in an area where she dealt with rights and medical benefits for children in the county. And she worked with a lot of nurses who had a lot of contacts in the health community. And when she told them that they're going to start my treatment in 3 months, you know, one of her coworkers, her father had passed away, I think, if I remember, it was from colon cancer. And they told her, oh no, you need to call this person at the hospital and tell them you need to get started right now, and don't take that for an answer. And so she really became a darn near militant advocate for me. And I actually started in about a month or less. So it's I'm a good soldier. If I'm told to wait 3 months, I know I may not like it, but I had kind of a hard time, you know, bucking against that and demanding something different, or I should say back then I did. And so I learned more about advocating for myself. And once I was actually in the hospital in recovery, I did much more of that. And I think a lot of that is because of the demonstration that my wife made about, hey, you're worth it, and here's what you do, and you keep talking until you find the person you need to talk to and let them know.
Makes you wonder about how it works for people who don't have sort of advocates on the inside, or don't have interactions, or don't have someone, you know, what happens to, yeah, exactly. Everybody else just goes, okay, I gotta wait 3 months because that's what they told me. I didn't know there was a loophole.
You just have to make it, you get as educated as you can. You chart your own course and you stick with it unless you get information that radically changes your view. And if you become a total pain in the butt, you become a total pain in the butt. Tough. It's your life, not theirs. And no one has your interest in the system like you do.
I think that's one of the great things about the support groups and advocacy that happens in places like, you know, the Colon Cancer Alliance and Fight Colon Cancer, and these places that bring folks together. They can hear these voices who encourage them to advocate for themselves if they're not already doing that, or if they don't have somebody, they can find a buddy or, you know, some kindred spirit on the internet and to really help them through that. So I absolutely encourage anybody who's going through anything like this to reach out, you know, and into the community. Whether or not they choose to stay there long term, there's a lot of support and a lot of help to be had.
Because in your day, around 2010, I guess you would have been diagnosed or 2009 around, and mine, 2010, Facebook wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing in those days. There wasn't, they didn't have those big, like they do today, big communities of people with.
Well, and also the cancer community online hadn't really developed. There might be just a website for a not-for-profit, but you didn't have the proliferation of bloggers and other people out there that you have now. Twitter was non-existent really when it comes to cancer. I mean, it was a very different landscape. And one of the things that has evolved in social media that I think is fabulous is the fact that people can connect with other people for things along these lines. I think it's been a game changer.
Absolutely. Well, Facebook was in sort of its early stages. In fact, yeah, back in 2009 when I got diagnosed, and it was a few years after that, somebody at the organization actually pointed me toward the CDC, who were doing the commercials for anti-smoking. So it was through my association with them, they actually introduced me to a whole different community as well. But yeah, today it's coalesced, I guess you could say, and there's a lot more coordinated effort and communities that are available to folks.
That was one of my questions about, you know, I know about your smoking cessation initiatives, and I was going to ask you what you've learned from those initiatives.
Wow. Well, I didn't use anything to quit smoking. Mine was cold turkey.
When was it?
Which time? I quit smoking. There was one time I quit smoking, but even after I had been diagnosed, I was still using smokeless tobacco. So I didn't quit probably close to a year after. And there was an incident that happened, well, not an incident, but there was a situation that came up that just, again, flipped the script for me. It changed my mind and the way I looked at things, and I just stopped. I know that there's a lot of, I'm not sure exactly what your question is. So if I'm not hitting on it, you know, let me know. But I think there are a lot of great smoking cessation aids, and whatever it takes for someone to quit smoking, I think that's, you know, whatever works for them is great.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I know in my life as a psychologist, when people would come to work on smoking cessation, the single greatest predictor of whether they actually did quit smoking is, did they want to quit smoking?
Yeah.
so well, you know, you know, all the therapy and all the work in the world won't change if you are not interested in becoming a non-smoker. Really,
I'm kind of fascinated by the period we all go through post-treatment. How has your life changed? Do you live differently? Do you eat differently? How has your life changed since cancer on a day-to-day health-oriented basis?
I reflect more. I still have, you know, I've got other medical issues that I still deal with. I get constant reminders about having had cancer, but overall, I think my life is better. It's I've got more direction. I've got more appreciation for things. If I make mistakes or I get upset about something, it's a lot easier for me to look and say, oh, I made a mistake. You know, that hindsight doesn't take quite as long to get to. So, you know, I'm imperfect. I'm still still getting there, still trying, but I've got a lot of drive to accomplish the things that I feel like have been put in my heart to do. And that includes retiring early. You know, I could have continued working for the county for another 5-10 years and increased my take-home pay after retirement. But I just decided, you know, do I want to work 10 more years and be overall unhappy for a little more money that I may be able to enjoy? You know, we talked about you don't really ever know when you're going to go. So I decided, no, I've got enough money if I leave now. I actually left early. I left 5 years earlier than our basic retirement plan establishes, which means I not only left soon. So what they do is they give you additional reductions in pay for leaving, you know, up to 5 years early. So on my 50th birthday, I was gone. See ya. And I got stuff that I'm doing now. And I feel better about what I'm doing. I mean, I have no regrets about my law enforcement career at all. And the people that I met and the things that we did is phenomenal. But it was time to go. You know, I've got other things that I want to do. And I think having cancer really showed me the door. It outlined that opportunity, that path. And if I learn nothing else through this, it's that, you know, some paths you don't get to choose, but some you do. And the last thing I wanted to do was 5 years from now, 10 years from now, on my deathbed, to look back and lament the fact that I didn't take an opportunity that I had that I really wanted to take.
Mm-hmm. No, would have, could have, should have.
No.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I wanted to be in law enforcement, so I was 30 years. I mean, that's a heck of a career, you know, 22 years with one agency, and it did a lot of good, and I learned a lot of things, and I saw a lot of changes, and law enforcement is not real popular right now. And, you know, when I've got it in my heart to do something else, and I had an opportunity to go, I jumped.
I think it's an opportunity, and I think we're living longer. Technology is accelerating the rate of change. I think that we all need to expect to have multiple careers in a lifetime, and sometimes some very different careers, which I think is exciting. I think the possibility of lifelong learning is terrific.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that was instilled by one of my mentors was to be a lifelong student. You know, if you're not learning, you're not growing, and if you're not growing, you're dying. So I'd like to put that off as long as I can.
I think we're all in agreement on that.
You know, in reading your book, I actually found it hard to do at some places because it was very, your treatment path, of course, was very similar to mine, or at least your initial one. And that, so reading through that, I had to relive quite a number of those procedures and a lot of those things. And one thing I thought that was, you know, you don't have to answer this because you didn't kind of go in depth about what life is like as a reversed ileostomy person, you know, that having to have the temporary ileostomy and then have the reversal. And if you've had a history of radiation, I know what that does to someone in terms of their day-to-day function and how long lasting that is. But you didn't go there in your description, probably because it's just too personal to talk about. But you know, I happen to know that you probably suffered a great deal more than you let on to your bloggers. As I was reading it, I was thinking, you know, this is way harder on him than he's saying, because he just...
there's something, did I miss a chapter?
Yeah, you can't write a chapter about that. So I guess I just reflecting as I was reading it, is that as harrowing as it wasn't, I know having been there, that what you went through was actually much worse than you.
Well, I think you have to edit your cancer experience, though, no matter what. I think we all have things that we just edit for the benefit of others, because how do you really explain it to them? Yeah.
Some things take too long to explain and are just too hard and too horrible for people to hear, and they just can't hear them. They can be shared with people.
My favorite analogy I like to use is arm wrestling. You know, imagine you're going up to an arm wrestling match, but you only get to use your pinky. And they're like, what? I said, okay, well, if you didn't get that, then never mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But actually, you know, it's my perspective on sharing the journey and being a part of that. You know, we talked about the fantastic advocacy that goes on with the different cancer communities of survivors and caretakers and whatnot. But I found that some people are really phenomenal. Some people really get involved with those communities, and it becomes a lifelong relationship, and they want to help others, and they want to be buddies to people who are newly diagnosed. And I don't want to take anything away from those folks, because some of them helped me, and I really wish at times that I could be like that. But what I found was that the farther I got from treatment, successful treatment, quote unquote, the more I kind of wanted to distance myself from some of that, because it felt like it was keeping me in that place. It was keeping me in those memories and in that mindset. And I really struggled at times to move on and have the benefit of this second chance, if you will, to do something else. And that required a lot of focus. So I struggled for a while with feeling like almost like an outsider, like because I had takedown surgery and I didn't have a permanent ostomy, that I wasn't really part of that community. And there were times when I felt like, you know, I really don't have a right to say much here. Maybe I should just go in the other room, you know? And so everybody, I think, again, has to have their journey and find where they're comfortable as that journey progresses. And mine was to kind of distance myself from that. And that's part of the reason why I didn't write a lot about it. Believe me, Robin, if it was in my heart to describe this stuff, I'd have been as frank and detailed as anybody wanted, including in the book, because that's the commitment I made when, you know, my wife said, you should publish this book. And I said, I don't know. She said, that'll help people. I said, okay, well, we'll see. But I didn't want to take anything out, because it wasn't about the scientific, you know, medical processes and, you know, just a bunch of facts and numbers. It was my experience. So if I am a smartass when I write, or, you know, if I use certain terminology or express thoughts that are dark, well, that's where I was then. And so the whole point of the book was sharing my journey. And then my journey over time sort of kind of veered away from that.
Yeah, and when in a lot of our interviews, as we've spoken with various authors, a lot of them have expressed that. They said, you know, that was then, this is now I'm into something totally different. I have a new goal, and it's this. And people sort of move out of the sort of crisis mode that dominated their thinking for so long. And, you know, I you know, just even in the ordinary circles, like with my own book, I've had people who are literally on their deathbed, like they're 2 weeks away from dying and they've read it twice. And other people who've said, I had cancer 18 years ago and I can't even look at the cover. So they will not have anything to do with that topic. And other people who like, bring it on, I want to know what everybody goes through, even if it's not my cancer. So I've had, you know, and as you have probably had a wide range of people's response to the cancer experience, but also to cancer-related information. Some people can't even say the word, and some people are like totally lean into it. So like Pat and I kind of lean into it and say, well, let's just see where this can go in terms of the peripheral experiences around art and writing and cancer road trip and travel and photography, adventure. You know, what are other facets of that diamond, if you like,
yeah, but you know, I think the point's well taken. It's a multifaceted diamond, and at any point in time, you can be anywhere on the spectrum. I mean, one of the things that always hits me really hard is I volunteer to talk to people who are newly diagnosed, specifically with nodal marginal zone lymphoma, which is very rare. And it is a hard thing for me to do because it takes me back. Some people go through relatively little treatment and they do great. And you sit there and you think, why couldn't that have been my course? It's difficult. I tend to live in that forward, positive, let's go have an adventure place. But every now and then I get yanked back, and it's a little terrifying. It really is.
Yeah, I think in terms of responses to my book, some of the greatest comments I've had were from people who were not people going through cancer themselves, but caretakers, loved ones, One gentleman at work actually read the book and said his father had gone through colon cancer, but really had no idea what was happening. And so he said reading the book actually helped him to understand, and as a result, he went back and had conversations with his father about that. So I really think sort of exposing some of the things that go on with at least with my colon cancer journey, to those folks who have questions. As I put it, I try to answer a lot of questions that people are afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And so if they read the book, I mean, those answers are going to hit them right in the face. And it's, it's educational and it's enlightening, and you can take a lot from it.
And so, I guess that kind of brings us sort of a good sort of note to close on, I guess, is that, these harrowing experiences that were unexpected and unforeseen happen in all our lives. We're suddenly there. We move through them. And if some way we can kind of, at that where we are at that time, we can kind of transmorgify them into a way that that others can receive, either others with cancer or others who are curious about the cancer experience for whatever reason, and that can be eye-opening on many levels for many, and that it can in the big picture result in fostering better relationships in families, better fostering in ourselves a sense of accomplishment of having done something good with something terrible that happened to us.
Right.
Mark, thank you. This was just great. This was such a good discussion today. I am so glad you were able to join us.
I'm glad you had me. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you both and have a conversation. I think it's wonderful.